Okay, so here are the answers to the practice quiz of Chapter 6, not the appendix to Chapter 6, but the actual chapter. So here are some of the questions, which may be in a different order for you. So refer to figure 6.3. What is the market demand in cubic meters per month for a cement price of $60 per cubic meter? And these are the demand curves for 3 different individuals. So at $60, this individual A demands 2,000 cubic meters. Individual B at 60 doesn't demand anything. The highest price that they're willing to pay is anything close to $30 is when they start consuming. Individual C consumes about half of this, so 1,000 plus the 2,000, we're looking at 3,000 would be the closest answer. This marginal utility theory question, it might not be the best. So all in all, what are we talking about when we talk about utility? There's total utility and there's marginal utility. So marginal utility is based on the extra utility or the extra satisfaction you get of consuming an extra good. So let's say you're eating pizza, you've had 4 slices and you're about to have a 5th one. Well, what's the extra satisfaction you're going to get from it? And we saw in this class that there's this law of diminishing marginal utility, that first slice of pizza will bring you more happiness because you're really starving, you really crave it, compared to the 5th slice of pizza. So total utility is the total amount of satisfaction, whereas marginal utility is the extra satisfaction you get. So it's essentially utility theory. If we think about that consumer, that pizza slice example, is a situation where the consumer behaviors that underlies a theory of demand, which the demand curve, if you kind of think about it, is for this quantity, this is the maximum price I'm willing to pay because that's my willingness to pay based on the utility that I get from consuming it. If I pay a price below it, I get consumer surplus, I get extra satisfaction. It is used to calculate consumer surplus, but you also need price to calculate consumer surplus and other things, so that's not the right answer. It's the total satisfaction from consuming of some good by the consumer. Well, total satisfaction would be that kind of idea of total utility. Here we're talking about marginal. Proving the demand curves are always downward sloping. Well, it kind of explains why it might be the case, but it doesn't really prove it. How producers allocate their scarce resources is not the right answer here. So maybe not the best question, but make sure you understand just the basic concept of marginal and total utility. If we refer to this figure, suppose that price is P0, and total consumer surplus is given by what? Well, consumer surplus will always be the area below my willingness to pay, which is represented by my demand curve. So anything below this, above the price paid, because even though this is my total satisfaction from consuming this product, if I pay this amount, well, my consumer surplus is only based on the extra gains that I get. So the higher the price, the smaller that gap will be. So it has to be above the price that you pay, below the demand curve, and it has to be to the left of the amount of units that are being sold. If for some reason there's a quota or something in place that doesn't allow you to consume more than this quantity here, well, these units here can't be consumed, so they can't be counted in consumer surplus. Anything to the right here is not consumed, shouldn't be counted, and anyways it would be negative consumer surplus because my willingness to pay here is smaller than my market price. That's why I stop consuming at Q0 and I don't consume more. So if we're thinking total consumer surplus, it's this area. What answers represents this area? Below P0, below P0, this is and to the left of Q0, this area here is the total amount of money I've paid. It's the price I've paid times the amount of units I purchased. So this is the total expenditure. That's not the right answer. Under the entire demand curve, well, this would be kind of my, in a certain way, this is the value I have for this amount of units, but since I have to pay a certain amount, it's not a surplus. On the demand curve to the left of Q0, so that's already good. It has to be left of Q0, but above P0. So on the demand curve, left of Q0, above P0, this would be the right answer here. Under the demand curve to the left of Q0, once again, this would be the whole area here. It takes into account how much you're paying, so that is not part of consumer surplus. And above the market price, well, that's very vague. Is it all of this area, like even beyond Q0? That's not the right answer. If consumption of an extra unit of some good generates a marginal utility of 0, then consumption of that additional unit would mean that total utility would also be 0. Is not necessarily the case. If you think about this last unit, whoops, that's the next question actually. You'll see it better in this next question here. How this would not be the case. Would not change is actually the right answer. Be increasing, be decreasing, be negative is not the right answer. If we look at this next question and we come back, you'll probably understand better. Dave's consumer surplus on movie rentals per week, even though we don't really rent movies anymore, is represented as such that his willingness to pay for the first movie is $10 and it drops the more he rents. And if he pays $5 each movie rental, well, that first unit, he would get $5 of consumer surplus because his willingness to pay is greater than what he pays, then $3, then $1.50, then 50 cents, then 0, then minus 50, minus 75. So he wouldn't consume these. So how many movies will Dave rent per week, such as consumer surplus on the last unit is 0, is 5 units. So here we could see, as I mentioned for the previous question, that the 5th unit has a consumer surplus of 0 because he's paying $5 and he values it at $5. But it doesn't mean that his total consumer surplus goes down to 0 because he still made $5 on this first unit, $3, $1.50, and 50 cents. So he still has surplus on the previous units consumed. It's just the last one that he consumed had kind of like the same willingness to pay and what he had to pay for it. So you're eating pizza or you're consuming something else and you have a lot of value at first and you always pay the same price for the extra product. And then the last product you consume, you're kind of like on the fence of should I have one more, should I not? It doesn't really add much value. Whereas that first slice of pizza or that first movie had a lot of value to it. So it kind of explains in this question here of that even though that last unit generates a marginal utility of 0, doesn't mean that total utility or that total consumer surplus would also be 0. That is the common error that people make. So hopefully that clarifies for Chapter 6 practice questions.